Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is June 25th, Tuesday, 2024. Gamecock football, they're going to be reporting in just over a month. Month and some change, Joe. We're going to have football back in our lives. And then before you know it, first game of the year, August 31st, under the lights at Williams-Brice Stadium. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate having you guys here today. A lot to talk about in the world of recruiting. We will get you all caught up as far as where USC stands, a couple new additions, and a couple thoughts too that I want to go off on here. We talked about some of them last week on Gamecock Central, but I want to say it out loud. That was in written form. Joe, yesterday, USC picked up a commitment from an in-state quarterback by the name of Cutter Woods. Now, that's a great name. What a friggin' name, right? For a quarterback, too, Cutter Woods. But I think that what makes this sweeter, though, outside of the fact that he's a local kid, is that USC was able to add him after he had committed to Wake Forest. They were able to get him to flip. So I say that because you see him, the Anderson native, 6'2 and a half, just under 200 pounds. You see some of the other schools he was considering, and we scroll on where we got recruiting. Some of the schools that had offered him. See some of the other Power 4, Power 5. If you still want to call it Power 5, it just feels weird calling it Power 4 now. So that's what you got there with the quarterback. I think what's important when you look at South Carolina's scholarship situation, and I don't want to get people sick shuffling around going from screen to screen here, but let's go from that screen and let's show you this one real quick, okay? This is the breakdown of South Carolina's scholarship standpoint for the next couple of years, right? Robbie Ashford comes on in, considered a junior. Lenore Sellers, redshirt freshman. So, of course, some of these guys could have a couple of years extra of eligibility if you're factoring in redshirt years, injuries, right? A guy like Luke Doty, he's listed as a junior. He's been here, it feels like forever, though, right? So I mention those things because you look at the quarterback situation right now. Robbie Ashford, Lenore Sellers, Dante Reno. Those are your scholarship quarterbacks. You throw Cutter Woods in there now for the future. In a perfect world, Lenore Sellers goes out there, he has a phenomenal season, and you walk away after 2024 saying, okay, we have our guy. And I know some people feel that way already heading into the season, but after this year, you want to say, all right, we have our guy for the next couple of years. Even if that is the case, I don't need to remind this fan base that you're only one play away, especially at that position. Think back to Shane Beamer's first year at South Carolina. Think of the number of quarterbacks they went through. The fact of the matter was you had a grad student come on in, a grad coach, came on in, graduate assistant, I think was the phrase I was looking for. You had a graduate assistant, Joe, and you made him a grad student, a grad transfer, because he had to go play quarterback. That's how bad the situation was as far as depth was concerned in that quarterback room. So I bring that up. To say that even if you feel good about Lenore Sellers, you need competition in that quarterback room. You need depth in that quarterback room. And Robbie Ashford, he comes on in. Who knows what his status will be as far as what they will plan to do with him this season. If Lenore Sellers is healthy for the whole year, is he a guy that would want to come back for another year? You hope that would be the case because he has experience. I'm not trying to get too far ahead talking about 2025 here, but when we're talking about recruits, I think it's important to keep these things in mind, especially at the quarterback position.
Yeah, Mike, Cutterwood's a guy that can really sling it, right? We saw him. He worked out at camp a little bit a couple weeks ago. And Dowell Loggins and the offensive staff were just really impressed with what he could do. The arm talent is certainly there. And to be able to flip him from Wake Forest, like an in-state guy, like I think it's just a big addition to that quarterback room. You needed a quarterback in the class of 2025. So you're getting one, certainly underrated a little bit, but I think has potential to go up. I don't necessarily think he's a 3-star kid. I think he, could be a 4-star, but again, just another player with a really high ceiling. And I mean, you've got the room pulled up right now. Obviously, Lenore Sellers is the future, but you needed a quarterback in this 2025 class. Cutter was certainly impressed. When you get into his senior year tape and what he's about to go do in his senior year, you'll see why they offered this kid and why he's committed to South Carolina. He certainly can sling it. It's the arm talent is the main draw with him, and obviously you hope to develop other areas of his game. But that's a big one. And then also there have been welcome homes raining in. June is heating up for Beamer. All programs cross country getting recruits, but Shane Beamer's been on a roll here, and obviously you want to get keep it rolling here as the dead period comes up. But things have been looking good, and Woods, again, you needed a quarterback. You're getting one with a lot of talent, was putting balls in really tight spots, tight windows, getting the balls into receivers' hands. So a lot there to love.
Yeah, the 15th prospect to commit to South Carolina's 2025 class. We'll give you a deeper dive into that in just a little bit. But some stats to throw at you, courtesy of our colleague, Wes Mitchell. About Woods. As a junior this past year, completed 220 passes of 317 attempts for just shy of 4,000 yards, 42 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, according to Max Prep. Had 345 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground, while leading Westside to a state title. Woods is considered the number 609 overall prospect and the number 37 quarterback in the 2025 cycle, according to the On3 industry ranking, which is an average of all 4 major recruiting media companies. It's also the number 13th prospect in the state of South Carolina. Originally committed to Wake Forest back in April. As you saw from some of those offers that we showed you on the screen, Auburn, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech also in the mix. But South Carolina was able to get him to flip this past weekend. Bird to Fly says, Mike, can you share some thoughts on that Fisher Brewer guy? Said about his stats compared to Arch Manning's stats. I don't know exactly what that is. Can't say that I have seen that. Not paying attention to everyone on social media. Not sure where he posted that or if he said it on a show, but can't really comment on that because I don't know exactly the specifics behind that. I will say this, though, Joe. It will be interesting to see what this quarterback room looks like, not just a year from now, but 2 years. And that's not to say, okay, someone's going to leave. But I think the reality is when you have a guy like Lenore Sellers, if he's able to come in and do the things that a lot of us expect him to be able to do, that changes a lot of things in that room. And we've seen that at other schools over the years, especially in this NIL era, especially in this transfer portal era. And that's not to say that there aren't guys that will want to stay and compete, but it just goes and shows that you need to have people that want to be in that room to begin with, and they're not afraid of competition. So obviously, let's see how things play out this season with Lenore's before we get too carried away. And I think there's some people in the fan base that are ready to already anoint him, but hopefully he'll be able to back some of those things up this fall. Having said all that, where does that put South Carolina as far as their ranking is concerned? Well, still early, and we've mentioned this before in the past, but South Carolina, they do have a lot of 10 stars. Excuse me. They have 10 3-stars prospects already committed. Some of those guys are going to be moving up. Some of those guys are going to be moving.
Oh, yeah.
There's high 3-stars. I'm trying to make sure I don't have that Boston accent in there. Might slip out. There's high 3 stars in there for them. They have 4 4 stars already committed, still looking for their first 5-star. They are currently ranked 22nd in the 2025 industry ranking football team recruiting rankings on On3. Where does that put them in the SEC? Well, they're still a ways back. And now add in the fact that you have Texas in there and Oklahoma. It's only going to make that number seem a little bit higher than you may have seen in years past. But to give you an idea, 22nd, South Carolina finished 19th last year, and they had 2 5-stars. Year before that, they finished 16th. Rutgers, this is real interesting, Joe. For anyone that just enjoys, paying attention to some of these rankings and looking at these numbers, Rutgers is currently ranked 16th. 16th. They have 23 stars committed to their 2025 class. Again, there's the formula that goes into this, and you're trying to calculate, okay, what the average is, and that's what. But I saw that the other day. I was just scrolling through it. I'm like, man, Rutgers is really trying to fill
Rutgers. Yeah, Mike. I mean, it's funny how it works sometimes. We saw last year when guys went up in ranking with Josiah Thompson, Cam Pringle, I think went up too, or should have. So yeah, I think South Carolina will see a lot of that in this class. I think Woods again potentially is one of those guys. And I think I did see the stat comparison too. Woods is in a air raid offense. And again, it's the arm talent, right? We saw it at camp, watching his tape. There's a lot to love. So again, they're filling out this class with guys that, might be underrated. Yeah. But again, when you're recruiting in state, it's hard to see, it's hard to pick up on every single guy and have an accurate ranking for everything like that. So, guys with a high ceiling that can really, show it. And then you just want to bring them to campus to compete at the end of the day, to make your program better, to offer more competition. So again, I think that's huge to be able to step up, and there's plenty of work left to do. And plenty of work left to be done for this program and Shane Beamer and whatnot. But they've been on a run. This class is really coming together, and it's a tight-knit class too. Anthony Addison, the committed defensive end, has really been leading the way, kind of recruiting and helping get this class together. So shout out to them. And again, it's coming along. It really is.
Yeah. And look, I wrote a story last week on this, talking about some of the 3-star commitments that South Carolina has been able to land. In that story, I mentioned that I'm not trying to dismiss star rankings altogether. Now, you talk to any coach, as soon as a player gets on campus, those rankings mean absolutely nothing, goes out the window. However, certainly there's something to be said when you're going after some of the best players in the country. There's a reason why players come out of high school with 5-star rankings, right? I mean, you can just look at them. You can just tell there's something about them, whether it be in the case of like a Marcus Lattimore. Marcus, of course, was a 5-star running back. Or you have a situation like Nick Harbor, 5-star athlete. So he's obviously making a transition from playing defensive end / tight end to learning the wide receiver position. But I think when you look at what South Carolina has done over the last couple of years, and we mentioned this too in the story last week, I'm not saying that, okay, if South Carolina fills out the rest of their class with 3 stars, everything's all dandy. No, certainly not. You want to be able to go out. There's a couple pieces, and Chris Clark, I think, actually wrote a story about it today or last night talking about just that. So pay attention to that if you haven't already on Gamecock Central, if you're looking for some of those higher rated star players. But you look at some of the players around this time of the year. Let's just use 2 from last year, because I know people are tired of hearing, oh, Corner Shaw, he was a 3-star back in the day. You guys have heard that. And certainly when you look at the players that he was surrounded by too, there's some studs. There's a reason why during that time period, it was arguably the greatest run in Gamecock football history for a 4-year span. So I know we won't do the history lesson there. But what I will say is a year ago, you had a guy like Fred Johnson. You had a guy like Matthew Fuller. Both players around this time of the year last year were 3 stars. What happened when it was all said and done with their recruiting class? Well, Fred Johnson moves on up to be a 4-star. Matthew Fuller moves on up to be a full 4-star. Johnson, considered the 15th top linebacker in his class. Fuller, 13th top running back in his class. So I bring those things up to say it is so early right now. And when you're talking about evaluation on some of these players, and you'll see some players will get bumped down too. It happens. It will happen to some South Carolina players, perhaps. It happens out there in college football. You see some of these players, they're ranked so high right now, but that's based on the body of work they've done through their first 3 years. And some of these players, when we're talking about guys who are friggin' 16, 17, going on 18 years old, I mean, not to turn this into a health class, but we're talking about guys going through puberty too, right? I mean, some of these guys are going to have growth spurts this year.
Not fully developed is what you're saying.
They're gonna gain more muscle mass. I mean, there's different things that when you look at some of these players and say, okay, I see something there. And when you look over the last couple of years, some of the players that South Carolina has picked up in some of these recruiting classes, and certainly not everyone is going to be a home run hit. Certainly not every player is going to be like a Trevon Baugh. Think back to two recruiting cycles ago. Baugh was a 3-star. Did pretty damn good on the offensive line this year, I'd say, right? Freshman All-American. I mean, did pretty good things up there. So there are certainly outliers both ways that we can look at this. We can look at the 5-stars and 4-stars, and some of these guys don't pan out. But we can also look at some of the 3-stars. And when you look at South Carolina as a program, can we just be friggin' honest with ourselves? I think the majority of the fan base is. But I think there's some people that just aren't, Joe. Where South Carolina is at right now, the majority of their team is going to be made up of high 3-stars and low 4-stars. That's just the reality of it. You're going to have some walk-ons in there too. But on top of that, guess what? Transfer portal plays a big, big role these days. And that's not to say, okay, forget about recruiting altogether. Certainly not. But we've looked at South Carolina bringing in some of these talented 4-stars, and they're not even here anymore. Right? Guy like Pup Howard, gone. But then you look at what South Carolina was able to do this offseason in that linebacker room. Stone Bland also gone. They were able to flip that room. That room looks completely different from a year ago. Look at the running back room. Transfer portal. Flipped completely. So I think we're also in an era now where I'm not saying that high school recruiting is not important. I still believe it is the core of a program. We've heard Shane Beamer talk about it in the past as well. But I don't think it tells the full story anymore. Because South Carolina this past offseason ranked 10th in the transfer portal for team rankings. That doesn't get brought up, it feels like. We want to talk about high school recruiting rankings. I get that. But you should also look at what's going on in the transfer portal rankings as well. I think that tells the complete story as far as roster and what the roster is going to look like heading into this year, certainly, but down the line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you want to recruit guys out of high school, but you're not going to be able to have, the best recruiting class every year, right? Unless you're Georgia or, Alabama at the top. If you're South Carolina, it's just not going to happen, right? So trust that the transfer portal will give it, right? You're going to be able to evaluate guys based on game tape, in college football, likely from a P5, P4, I guess now, program. And so the portal's wide open. I think that's a huge, huge benefit. I loved this comment here from Craig, like the first one and then even the second one too. Joe Judge, Nikki, and DQ were camp evaluations. They worked out. Trust the coaches to evaluate these guys. I couldn't agree more, right? That's kind of the way that you have to do it to find these diamonds in the rough. They come in and obviously you do all the measurables. You run them through the 40, anything like that. But if they're tearing up 7-on-7, showing that dog that compete, it really plays to your favor. And that's how you find the diamonds in the rough. I mean, Gio Bennett was at 7-on-7, just competing his butt off, getting in guys' faces after a big catch, showing the Mazio Bennett that everyone knows and loves. So I think it's huge when you're able to do that and evaluate guys based on camp. And then, rely on the portal when you have to and fill in the gaps where you might have guys transfer out. Cause that's another thing you have to factor in. So the portal will taketh away. And that's kind of the game you have to play after, you bring these guys with all this potential or with the high ceilings in.
So I'm not 100% sure. Craig, you mentioned Joe Judge. I'm assuming you mean Judge Collier. I don't think you're talking about the former Giants head coach. Unless I'm missing something, I just want to make sure we're on the same page with that in case anyone is reading that. Also coach for the Patriots, Joe Judge. He worked with former Gamecock tight end coach. Can you name that, Joe?
Huh? Joe Judge? Or what are you talking about?
Used to work with a former Gamecock tight end coach that's at Murray State now.
Oh yeah, Jody, you're right. Obviously, yeah,
that's right.
He Lumbo
look at that.
Made his way up to Amherst.
He had some good Joe Judge stories. I will say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Judge. Okay, gotcha. Joe Judge. Got it. Oh, we're all on the same page. Just wanted to make sure we're there. Got it.
That's
there
weird.
We good.
Comments thrown at me this time. Yeah.
No, you're good. But just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page because some people see the comments, and I just want to make sure that people understand that as well. Travis brings up the star ranking system doesn't account for how a kid is getting used. I wish fans would just ignore the stars and worry more about the fit of the player to our scheme. We mentioned Anthony Addison, and this was a player in particular that when South Carolina signed him, I specifically talked about the impact he can have at South Carolina based on what we've seen them do defensively. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about USC towards the end of last season, their defense using that 3-3-5 look. How much of that will we see this year? It's still obviously to be seen. I think we'll see a good bit. Will it be used more than a 4-2-5? I don't know if I'll go that far quite yet until we see them out there. But I think more than anything, when you look at Addison, what I really like about him is the fact that he has experience of playing multiple different techniques on the defensive line, right? 5 technique, 7 technique, 3 technique. You're moving him all over the defensive line. And by putting him there in high school and having experience of being able to work and see different looks, right? You're not always just head up on a tackle or maybe just a shade inside the tackle. He has an understanding of playing in a system that is flexible, right? Like you're gonna move, you're gonna change things up from a personnel standpoint. So we talk about those things now, and the reason I'm bringing them up to go off of what Travis is talking about here, there is certainly something to be said about bringing players in that can fit your scheme right away. Now, does that mean every freshman is going to come in here and play right away? Certainly not. And if that's the case and you're just playing freshmen, you're probably going to get your ass kicked. I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I mean, in the SEC, if you're playing the majority of your players are freshmen at both sides of the ball, it's going to be a long game. It could be a long season. Having said that, yes, there's outliers that will be able to play right away. There's also the case that some freshmen are going to come on in and have an opportunity to provide depth early on. So I think more than anything, Travis, to piggyback off of what you're saying, because I agree to what you're saying to an extent, I think there is something to be said about going after the high stars. And I'm sure you would agree with that, whether it be, a guy like Harbor, right? Does Harbor fit South Carolina's system in comparison to maybe some of these other players? It's still to be seen, right? But we also know that he is a big guy. He's someone that has a lot of speed. And even though he's coming along in his development at wide receiver, there's a lot of potential there. I don't know if that's the best example, but you know what I'm trying to get at, Joe?
Apology. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, it just goes back to your whole recruiting strategy and evaluating guys through camp. You bring guys on campus and guys that, you think have some potential. And if they can perform at camp, it really turns into something. So, Anthony Addison's one of those guys too. I mean, I know you started with him talking about him. But he is one of those guys I could see making a jump. I mean, the length is off the charts. Really possessed it. And he's quick. He's a quick player too. And he was part of a camp eval, and then also Blake Franks was a camp eval as well. Anthony Addison, I've seen him working out is, it's really fun to watch because he possesses all that length and all that speed coming off the defensive end. So I could see him making a jump. There's a lot of guys in this class that will. Shed Surratt was another one. He was working out a couple weeks ago, and I mean, he possesses all of it. Quickness for a big guy. I mean, and Shed Surratt's a big boy on the interior offensive line. So shout out to Greg Adkins and Lonnie Teasley too for getting this offensive line class together to kind of start backing up the great wall of Carolina that already is in.
Joe, you can see the video, Anthony Addison.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to play this just for those of you who haven't seen Addison's highlights. We put this up when he committed to South Carolina. Big boy. But this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about being able to find players that fit the scheme. See where he's lined up right now?
Look at that.
Playing on that outside of the tackle. Yeah. And watch how they move him around. See, now he's inside. So that's not to say he's the only player in the country that's playing inside and outside on the defensive line. I mean, obviously, there's multiple players that are capable of doing that, especially when we're talking about some of the better athletes in the country. But the point being is when you look at what South Carolina is doing defensively, especially towards the end of last season, and you look at what they're also doing from a recruiting standpoint with the talent they have at edge, what they've been able to do at outside linebacker as well, it feels like this is a defense that has a lot of speed off the corners, and they also have a lot of length. And when you combine those two things, that 3-3-5, it just seems like it's too good not to use.
Yeah. No, again, most definitely. And we have a lot of speed coming off the edge, Mike. You look at Dylan Stewart. Anthony Addison just adds to the speed in that room. And when you have a guy like this, I mean, to even run like a stand-up 6 almost, flash him out on the edge. And Addison's tape, I mean, obviously you guys just watched, but, he can go inside, he can go outside, versatile pass rusher, can get into the backfield. And that's what Sterling Lucas and Travian Robertson are really looking for. You need more of a pass rush. You need more of a run game, or you need to be able to stop the run a little bit better than you did the last couple of years because it's been bad. So, they've gotten the depth in those two rooms now, and they feel pretty confident about it. And Anthony Addison's going to be more to the answer to that as well in this 2025 class.
So 11 Football asked a question that I'm sure some of you would also agree with. How do you decipher the difference between a 3-star dog and a fake 4-star, if that makes sense? We've had a couple of 4-stars come in that you could tell weren't going to pop from the jump and vice versa. So this is just my take on it because I'm sure Chris and Wes, they've been doing the recruiting stuff for a hell of a lot longer than me. But this is going back from my days of playing college football to continuing to talk to a lot of my coaches and teammates who are coaches now. Some of those players, but the coaches who I played for, they've worked their way up throughout college football. And I continue to talk with them all the time. And this is something that we talk about. Might not be specifically, about 3 and 4, but it's more than anything, it's about potential when you're going out there and watching a player. We know that there's a lot of camps going on right now, and there's been camps going on in South Carolina the last couple of weeks. Cutter Woods, what he was able to do in 7-on-7. Dal Loggins, very impressed. Do you make an offer just because of what's going on in 7-on-7? Certainly not. It's a combination of what Dal and this coaching staff have seen from his tape in games from last season. And you combine that with what you see in person. So I bring those things up because I think more than anything, some people get so caught up on some of these star rankings. And again, like we talked about, South Carolina, they're in a different situation than Georgia, Ohio State, dare I say Clemson. It's okay to be realistic about where these things are right now. The Gamecocks are coming off a recruiting class in which they landed 2 5-stars. That's never happened before in program history. Never. So I'm not going to sit here and say that didn't mean anything, because if I sit here and say today, oh, no, don't worry about the star rankings. Well, wait a minute, Mike. You just told me that they had 2 5-stars last year. Why are you bringing that up? I get that. I get that. But there's not going to be the consistent number of 5-stars that South Carolina is going to be rolling in comparison to some of these other schools. Even the 4-stars, you're not going to be able to bring them in at the same rate compared to some of these other schools right now. That's just the reality of it. But I also think more than anything, when we look at the fact that South Carolina took advantage of the transfer portal this past offseason, and they were able to flip their rooms completely, several rooms, linebacker, running back in particular. The wide receiver room, there's talent in that room. There's a lot of question marks in that room, but one could say that they flipped that room as well, because the number of players on scholarship in that room, 50% of them are new faces. So you could make an argument there too, that they flipped the wide receiver room too. So I think it's more about, okay, what player do we feel like what player can come in here, and do we feel like can fit our scheme? But we can also look at and say, okay, this player might be someone that it's going to take some time, maybe a year or two, before they can really get going. It could be a little bit of a project. And which players can come on in here and potentially make a case to be able to compete early on. You look at a guy like Dylan Stewart, that goes without saying, right? You look at a guy like potentially Josiah Thompson. That could be a guy that could see some playing time early on. It's going to be a deep offensive line room when you're talking about competition. We've talked about that this offseason. But I think those are some of the things I look at more than anything is, okay, you look at some of these 4-stars. Yeah, some of the grades aren't going to come out great for one reason or another. Maybe they were playing lower competition and they were looking better, and now they go up, especially in this conference. They get here, and now they're playing with guys that are bigger than them, and they just don't pan out for one reason or another. That doesn't happen just at South Carolina. It happens throughout college football. I think that's one reason. I think another reason, too, is some of these players who are lower-rated stars, as we mentioned before, puberty, whatever the case may be, they start to put on muscle a little bit later than some other guys. Maybe they weren't getting looked at like a guy like Fred Johnson last year through his junior year, or Matthew Fuller through his junior year. Maybe they're not getting looked at the same way. And then guess what? They go out their senior year and they ball out for one reason or another. So I think it's a combination of multiple factors, but I think those are some of them, Joe, that I would say stand out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that factor into your star rating. And I forget who it was. I think it was Jay Diz. A good point. A lot of kids don't get the press and don't go to camps, get a bunch of stars. Kids in Greenville County, like kid from East Side, didn't get looked that much. Rural Georgia kids always overlooked. Yeah, it's a really good point, right? It's a fact. It's a combination of your game film, and getting to camps. And if you get to as many camps, your star rating just isn't going to be that high unless your game film or jumps off the tape like a Dylan Stewart, like you mentioned. So it's always interesting to see how it all factors in. And I think the star rating is one thing, but when you get them on campus, it's another. You really find out what guys are made of when you really start to put them through the grind of college football, when they have upperclassmen pushing them to be better, and they're not the top dog anymore, right? So again, all the star ratings don't necessarily matter when you're on campus anymore, and start lining it up. So again, it is just a rating at the end of the day, but obviously it makes a difference when you're recruiting guys consistently, that are, 4 or 5 stars. It does add up in the end, but at the end of the day, it is a rating. And when guys, because I mean, guys get overlooked all the time, Mike.
Well, I agree. And Jay Diz talked about that, in his comment. Jay Diz, you're spot on. A lot of kids don't get the press and don't go to camps and get a bunch of stars. Kids in Greenville County, like the kid from East Side, they get overlooked, right? So I completely get that. And there's other things too. I mean, you want to talk about from a regional standpoint too, and I could speak on this from my experience in Massachusetts. There was a player, he's at Georgia now, played at my dad's school, D1. D1's the highest in Massachusetts. Left the school, went down to IMG Academy. When he came back, there was even more schools looking at him, right? So I bring that up because, and he ended up going to play defensive back at Georgia. I bring that up because there's no question that being able to have more eyeballs on you, just like anything in life, can lead to more notoriety. I mean, we see it every day. I mean, shoot, whether it be in the NIL space with some of these players, you can go on 3 and you can see NIL valuations and how much a player is quote unquote worth. How many followers do they have on TikTok, social media? As dumb as some
kids
of that
are using that too. Like they're using guys.
That's the thing. As dumb as that may sound to some people, there is something to be said about it because there's eyeballs. So, Johnny's Sub Shop, if they want to give, Joey 4-star a couple $100 to put a couple tweets out, well, Johnny 4-star, if he has a big following, it makes more sense to go to him in comparison to another player on the roster who might not have as many followers. So we're in a weird spot right now, weird time, where a lot of this is continuing to evolve right before our eyes, and it's happening so quickly. But there is something to be said about that part of it. But I use that as an example in comparison to recruiting as well, because it just comes down to eyeballs, certainly. But speaking about eyeballs, I want you guys to use your eyeballs and take a look at the screen in front of us, and you can see where South Carolina is currently at, 22nd on the team rankings for recruiting for the class of 2025. I mentioned before that this does not take into consideration, this is a completely different ranking than anything that is used with transfers. Obviously, this is a new year, but when we get down to it, we're talking about South Carolina picking up some transfers potentially ahead of the 2025 season. When we get to that point, this class will not be impacted. So take a look at that. Anything stand out to you, Joe? I mean, I'm just scrolling through this. I don't know if there's a team. I don't know if it's where South Carolina is in comparison to someone else. These are some of the teams that are above them. We talked about,
again, Rutgers. Rutgers
with their 23 stars.
Greg Shannon has got that class locked, apparently. But yeah, Rutgers. I don't know. I do think this class, Shane Beamer's class, is far from finished. I mean, just getting Cutter Woods committed right now. Again, your quarterback. It's still early. Usually, when the quarterback commits, it's still early in that class cycle. So they still got a long ways to go. Hopefully, they can get a couple flips. I mean, Woods was a flip, so hey, maybe a couple 4 or 5 star guys. But again, at the end of the day, it comes down to just exposure, right? And I mean, I could talk all day about how, like, if you're like a 3-star guy, maybe you have a big social media following, you get invited to a different camp or one of these 7-on-7 things, and you get more exposure, play well, and it's crazy how it all works with everything. And so at the end of the day, what matters is what kind of player you are when you show up to the building and start playing college football. and are a Division I athlete, right? So again, it's a fun time to pick and choose. It's essentially free agency for college football right now. And recruiting is kind of a subset of that, and so it's always fun when guys are committing. You get to go back, watch the tape. Did they hit? Did they miss? Is this kid going to be good? Add some excitement to talking season and really watch teams really build out classes. And I mean, obviously Michigan had a big weekend on a national scale. Yeah, it's just crazy to see who's going off and whatnot. And in terms of South Carolina, I think this class, again, I've mentioned it before, this class is far from finished. So got a lot of work to do. And again, a lot of work to be done still, but they're rounding things out for sure.
Let me ask you this, Joe, before we wrap things
Yeah.
up here on this Talking Tuesday.
Get some ads too.
I get naturally it is easy to look at the ranking systems and fans want to see their school finish ahead of, especially schools in the SEC, but they want to finish towards the top. I totally get that. All right. I mean, anything that South Carolina does, this fan base, they want to see their guys do well. I get that. When we sit here, when we talk about women's basketball and we brag about what they've done from a recruiting standpoint, and certainly what they've done as far as success on the court, and Don Staley and that staff, they've done a tremendous job. Now, we can look at that and say, okay, is there a direct correlation with being able to get the best players in the country? And granted, it's apples to oranges because we're talking about basketball and football. There obviously is something to be said about bringing in the best players. I mean, you don't have to be Bear Bryant to know that.
Yeah.
But I do think, though, when you look at what South Carolina has done over the last couple of years, and not every player has been a hit. I mean, there's been some players that people have brought up during this show on the side, and certainly some of those players were even 4 stars, and they weren't hits here. What they've done, put the star ranking aside, okay? And I know it's tough for some of these guys. Look at what they've done from a recruiting standpoint the last couple of years on the offensive line and the defensive line. Now, USC's O-line last year, we know that they dealt with injuries. You want to call it, I'm not making an excuse. It is what it is. You have to have the guy behind him ready to step up. But when you're playing 12 guys in the offensive line during the season, the continuity, it's going to be difficult to overcome regardless of who your quarterback is. Looking at the offensive line this year, looking at the defensive line in particular this year, they're looking like something that fans, I feel like, have been talking about a lot the last couple of years, which is looking like an SEC offensive line and SEC defensive line, having the size to be able to compete against the other big bodies in this tough conference. You're going to see that when they play Alabama. We see it when they go up against Georgia in years past. It's the SEC. You need to be able, even though things have spread out a little bit more in the sport, we're talking about airing the ball out, you still need to be able to run the football. Still need to be able to beat teams between the tackles. And that was something that I feel like for a while you could look at both sides of the ball, even though there were some players that went on to the NFL on both sides of the ball for South Carolina the last couple of years. But as a whole, I felt like that was something that South Carolina was missing for one reason or another. And when you look at from a recruiting standpoint of what they've been able to do over the last couple cycles, we already talked about Trevon Baugh, who was, oh, by the way, he was a 3-star. You look at what Luedecke Babalade did last year as a true freshman. You look on the other side of the ball, the defensive line room. D-tackle, yes, they're going to have to go into the portal most likely and be able to rebuild that D-tackle room after this season. I'm sure they will do their best to bring in more talent at that position out of the high school ranks. But as far as this season is concerned, at edge, at D-tackle, O-line, this is arguably the deepest they've been on both sides of the ball in quite some time.
Yeah, most definitely, Mike. I think, both sides of the football, this defense there's a lot to love. You reloaded in the transfer portal on both the defensive line and in your linebackers room, and then you have a bunch of studs coming back in your defensive backfield. So there's a lot to love on the defensive end. Again, you just knock on wood, got to stay healthy there. Same goes for the offensive line. Knocking on wood for that as well. You finally have, faces that you want on campus, right? You have some dudes. The Great Wall of Carolina is finally here, right? So now it's time to develop them, right? And you're going to get some continuity, and you mix in some veterans, Vershawn Lee and whatnot, leading the pack with a young studs in that room. I think it's going to be super beneficial. The competition's going to be great. You should find some continuity, and guys are going to get banged. So you're going to need 6, 7 guys that are going to be able to rotate in, play different spots and whatnot that you're confident with, and then go from there. And you're going to need to be able to run the football. That's another part of it. You restock that running back room. Oscar Attaway looks really, really good. Rocket Sanders, everyone's hoping he has a breakout season. Again, if he can stay healthy, it's go time, right? So there's a lot of things to love about this football team. It's all potential, right? And then you have a guy like Lenore Sellers that nobody knows what to expect. You're trying not to let the expectations and all the hopes get away from you when it comes to Lenore. So again, you could see this team winning eight games, maybe 9 if you win the bowl or the last game that you play. But so there's a lot of potential here. Now it's just about showing up, right? And trusting your game plan, trusting these coaches, and trusting yourself when it comes to week 1. We're about into July, which means, the dead period, and then summer camp starts, and we're right there back into the mix, getting ready to go. So yeah, there's certainly a lot to love. Mike, as you mentioned, restocked on both sides of the football. Now it's, just time to go.
No question about it. Well, before we wrap things up, let's hit some ad reads, Joe. You want to lead us off? I'll let you pick which one you want to do today.
Sounds good. We'll start with our good friend Clint Hammond of the Movement Mortgage Network. In need of help with mortgage, call on our good friend Clint Hammond. He's above us on all of our GC Live programming. He's been in the mortgage industry since 2003, which allows him to help everyone from the first-time home buyer to the complicated and complex jumbo buyer. Whether you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance, nothing is more important than a well-thought-out financial strategy that comes with 5-star customer service. He's even helped out our very own Wes Mitchell and former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth with their mortgages. So give our guy Clint a call. He's above us, like I said, on all of our GC programming. You can find him at clint.hammond.com or 803-771-6933. Once again, 803-771-6933 or at clint.hammond.com for all of your mortgage needs.
Today's show is also brought to you by Andy Luedecke, myperfectfranchise.net. Are you ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream? Looking for a side hustle while working your current job, wanting to diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy? Andy can help you. Andy's a franchise consultant as well as a franchise owner and helps people find franchises that fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. If you missed any of it, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can watch this show in its entirety for free. Make sure to hit that little bell icon to get notified anytime one of these GC live shows drop or any other Gamecock Central videos. Also, be sure to head on over to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network where you can listen to all of these GC live shows as well as appearances on 107.5 The Game, the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, and the Garnet Trust Hour. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike Eve. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and enjoy the rest of your week.